Hello, this is a road, one that's been painted a pretty colour at great expense. It opened at the end of May 2026, claiming to be the first of its type in the country. What is that type? A cycle street. This is Adams Road in Cambridge, because of course it's Cambridge, a city of hopes and dreams, with its Dutch-style roundabout, another country first, the superb guided busway, the largest in the world, sort of, and now this, the country's first cycle street, and today we're going to talk about it. My name is John, welcome to Auto Shenanigans. Why not consider subscribing? They love a bit of non-car related infrastructure in Cambridge, but with something like 30 to 40,000 people, or 20-ish% of the city's population using the cycle at least once a week to get about, that shouldn't come as much of a surprise. As mentioned, there have been many schemes to build new cycling infrastructure across the city, and perhaps the greatest of all was announced in 2016 when plans were put forward to build a network of 12 cycleways connecting Cambridge and its outer villages, which they called greenways, a marketing term for what will mostly be cycle paths built alongside existing footpaths or on old railways, or in the case of Adams Road, on the actual road itself. Hundreds of millions of pounds has been put forward to build 90-odd miles of greenways, with routes eventually looking a bit like this, and today we're interested in the Cumberton Greenway, which as a standalone item is estimated to cost around £14 million. As the name suggests, it will provide a cycle and walking route from the village of Cumberton, as well as serving Hardwick and Cotton, which combined have around 8,000 residents, many of whom cycle, I'm sure. However, whilst the majority of the Cumberton Greenway runs through the lovely countryside, don't worry about the M11, at its eastern end it runs through Cambridge's University and College district. And to understand why this is a problem, we need to take a look back, long into the past, to a time before the Greenways and the Adams Road cycle street, this time last year. Because back in the last year, Adams Road was one of, if not the main road used by brightly coloured trouser-wearing professors and students alike, travelling on their bicycles from the various residential areas to the University district. It's almost as if the cycling traffic was funneled down Adams Road, and during peak hours it's said that 3,000 cyclists wobble their way down the road. So cyclists use the road. In other news, water is wet. Why do we care? Because of this, the evil cyclist-killing motor vehicle. Can't you just off? Well, no, because the laws and road regulations allowed them to be there. Before the greenways, Adams Road looked a bit like this, featuring narrow footpaths, legal parking along its length, and not much space for actual cars or cycles to move about. But this is Cambridge, where the roads are nearly as old as your mum, ancient, so they're all like that. But unlike Adams Road, they don't usually have to deal with thousands of cycling nerds on a daily basis, and with those and motor vehicles trying to go about their day along a tiny road, you could imagine that chaos would ensue. And indeed, in 2000 and never, no fatalities or serious injuries have been caused on Adams Road, despite the huge number of cyclists going up against the motor vehicle every rush hour, and it's completely unacceptable. It's most likely because Adams Road isn't a main road or through road, it's a very quiet residential street in the nice part of Cambridge, with only about 12 houses. Unless you live there, you'll probably never have the need to drive down the road, but with the Greenways project comes money to spend, and some of that was spent on converting Adams Road into the first cycle street, because a lot of cyclists used it. Let's take a look at what they did. The narrow footpaths have been widened, except for where they haven't, to allow for a vehicle parking space, of which most have been removed and replaced with double yellows. As a result, the road is narrower, but on the plus side, it's been completely resurfaced, making it the best road surface in the country. And they finished it off in a delightful shade of dog-dick red, so you know for sure that you're on the cycle street. There's a few other changes as well, such as pedestrians being given priority at certain points, but no one's paying any attention to that. And that's probably going to be the case for the biggest change of all to the road, which is in the way it's used. The idea behind the cycle street is that the cyclist now has priority over vehicles, which they sort of did before, but it's now expected that cars will not be overtaking cyclists and instead sitting behind them. That's the expectation, but without completely rewriting the road traffic laws, which they aren't, other than a few fancy signs and asking nicely, I'm not sure there's much they can do to stop such activity, but they can make it difficult for vehicles by design, which they have. But what of the cost to rebuild the 500-metre stretch of road? Out of a total £800 million fund, 14 was allocated to build the Cumberton Greenway in its entirety, out of which £2.4 million was used just to build the Adams Road cycle street. £2.4 million for a resurface and a bit of paint seems a bit much to me, but it must have been worth it, and certainly local resident Juliet thinks so.
They're not very good at cycling, don't have lights and wear black.
Well, rejoice, Juliet, because that problem has now been solved. What's that? You
understand people feeling resentful that their roads are in a terrible state and you've got a nice new one for no reason?
No, don't be silly. This was definitely the highest of priorities and makes perfect sense. Except maybe it doesn't. I'm all up for building cycling infrastructure. The less cars that are on the road means the more road there is for those that want to drive. Everybody's happy. But such infrastructure needs to be part of a well-thought-out system or network. You can't just paint a 500-metre stretch of road red and call it a day, although apparently you can. And if we look a bit further than Adams Road, I don't think it makes that much sense at all. Certainly not £2.5 million sense. At one end of Adams Road, you've got a nice cycle path that's not used by cars at all. Lovely. At the other end, you've got Grange Road, a normal road, but with cycleways installed on either side, and connecting them up is the now cycle street, which seems a bit out of place. Sure, make some changes, but why couldn't you just install a proper footpath and cycleway, which would have served the same purpose for a lot less money? Or, if you're going to, do it the other way and change all of the roads into cycle streets. The little bit of Adams Road doesn't really help anyone. And another thing, 3,000 cyclists a day, no longer 3,000 during peak hours for some reason, probably because these figures were conjured up by the Greater Cambridge Partnership, a collection of various local councils and individuals with definitely no ties to the construction, consultancy or legal industries, which would benefit massively from a huge greenway building project. They are responsible for the project's existence and implementation. Some sources have suggested that the actual use figure is much less, but in any case, there's an underlying point that might make the whole thing a waste of time anyway. Pretty much every street in Cambridge can be cycled on, and cyclists should normally have priority on the roads anyway, as per the rules we've had in place for years. The roads don't need to be painted a fancy colour with a few signs added, and those aside, there isn't really anything different about the cycle street when compared to any other road. It's just got a fancy red frock. All they needed to do was make a few adjustments, such as widening the footpaths rather than rebuilding the entire thing, which would have been far cheaper. You don't build a free-flowing motorway interchange where a mini roundabout is needed. But maybe there's more to this than just a bit of red paint, because perhaps this is psychological warfare against the motorist at play. They could have done it on the cheap and the cyclists be just as happy. Some might say they were perfectly happy beforehand, but either way, if you want to slow down a motor vehicle, you need to create uncertainty. A narrow red road with images of bicycles on it, with limited parking, signs that say give priority to cycles, pedestrian crossing bits, etc, etc. All of this combined might make you think twice as you drive along, and indeed, at first glance, it looks like you aren't even allowed to drive down the road. And that uncertainty as a driver will naturally slow you down, making for a safer environment for cyclists. Although with hundreds of cyclists using the road and but a handful of cars, I'm not sure it was ever a real problem. But also, without the added tack, Cambridge wouldn't have been able to claim that they built the first cycle street, adding to their ever-growing list of amazing, world-beating infrastructure solutions. Sure, the idea was stolen off the Dutch, and over here the first was actually built in Cardiff, but that's Wales, which isn't even a real country. But what do you think? Is the Adams Road cycle street the genius solution that we should roll out everywhere? Or is it a poorly thought out waste of time and money? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Bye-bye.